So hello everyone, thanks heaps for having me present and to talk a little bit about DeFi. My name is Aaron McDonald. I am the co-founder and CEO of Centrality. And as we always do with Centrality, we like to think about the users. So my talk today is going to be about how can we make DeFi available to everyone. DeFi is a really exciting opportunity for us to take huge amount of friction out of the way finance works and to modernize the infrastructure of finance to be compatible with the age of the internet. If you look behind the scenes at a lot of the services that we use in our daily lives in the finance space, there's a lot of hodgepodge, there's a lot of mess, there's a lack of transparency, it's hard to innovate, it's expensive to execute, which in the end costs us as consumers. But for DeFi to really take off, we do have to make it available to everyone. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means today and give you some tips and tricks for getting involved and engaged in the DeFi space. So DeFi is exciting. Because it gives us some really cool things. It helps to speed up innovation through increasing competition out in the open and by providing composability. What does that mean? It means if somebody builds something and it's in this open blockchain environment, then someone else can come along and see that and they can build on top of it, or they can connect it to the thing that they're building themselves. So they don't have to build everything all over again. It also means that we can come up with innovative new ways to join different things together that wouldn't have been possible in a world where things sat in separate platforms. So the ability to speed up the pace of innovation is one of the really exciting things about DeFi. The other thing is there's a lot of friction in finance. You can think of all of the different steps that it might take to set up a bank account, for example, versus what it might take to create an account on-chain. That's an area of friction, and DeFi gives us the opportunity to remove some friction in the process and to allow things to run smoother, which in the end produces a more efficient system, reduces the cost of those systems, which reduces the cost to us as consumers. And the other thing that DeFi can do is it can make things more accessible and fairer to everyone. Blockchains don't understand where you're from or what your religion is or what color your skin is. And so the opportunity to participate in these open financial systems makes it possible for people who are marginalized or who could be on the fringes of society to get access to the same kinds of services that they're blocked from in the traditional world. So making things fairer for everyone's a really cool outcome as well. But there are risks. It's really important to understand that it's early on. And in this early phase, you're going to see all sorts of new things come out that are exciting and fun. But because it's new, it's risky. And it's important to understand that when you're investing in it and playing around with it. Now, don't let that scare you. Just understand it. And we'll put some tips in the rest of the presentation about how to engage in a way that might lower those risks. But there's three categories of risks in my mind. The first category is technical risks. This is new technology, and despite people's best efforts, sometimes they make mistakes, or sometimes they haven't thought of all of the possible problems that could exist, and so therefore they can't kind of engineer around them. And the only way we find out about these problems sometimes is just through trial and error. And you've seen over the last few years that the technical community grows in their knowledge and understanding of where those risks are, and when they release new products, they don't have the risks that we knew about before, but they might have ones that we don't know about yet. And so as this body of knowledge builds up, the risks will get lower, people will know about more possible vectors or problems, and they'll be fixed. The other thing is there are economic risks. On top of the technical risks, there are new types of economic models or old types of economic models being done in different ways, and those carry risks in themselves. We can see impairment loss has been a really big risk if you look at some of the yield farming projects out there and how that's kind of traveled over the last 6 to 12 months. And those types of economic risks are heightened because some of the controls that might exist in the non-DeFi space don't exist in the DeFi space. And so you have to be really wary of the types of economic risks and know that that they exist, and then take a measured approach to how you engage with the systems because of that knowledge. And the third area, which is not really it's not a nice area to talk about, and DeFi seems to, at large, perhaps not ignore, but maybe downplay the risks here. Any system that becomes systemic and important to an economy, regulators start to get interested in. And regulators can sometimes be positive because they bring about some controls that try and help consumers. Sometimes can be negative because their thinking isn't quite up to where the technology is or where the market is, and so they're regulating something they don't understand. Either way, there will be regulation in the DeFi space. And so if you're building in this space, you have to be cognizant of those things. If you're participating in these things, you have to understand that there could be regulatory impacts on the things that you're participating in. But that's what we're here to talk today about, is how can we make DeFi work for everybody. And I think there's some really important things to understand about DeFi in order to get us to the point where we can make it truly scale. And I don't mean the technology scale, but I mean the adoption and usability scale. I think a really cool thing to think about is it's not very decentralized, the D in DeFi, if only a small number of geeks can use it. You know, we need to make this stuff available for the masses to make it truly decentralized, because it's not just about the systems decentralization, it's about participation in a decentralized way. If we only have a small number of people participating, then that's a form of centralization in itself. So we have to really understand how we can make this stuff available to everyone and understandable to everyone. It's also not very useful for mass adoption if it's difficult to rely on the economics. I know that there's a lot of LARPing going on and YOLOs and people kind of aiding in things, and that's fun, but that doesn't scale to a global economy. People have to pay their rent and, you know, pay for their food and kind of their living expenses and want to save for their future. And so the economics of DeFi need to be built in such a way that people can rely on it in their daily lives. And so this kind of wild volatility that we have, it's a feature of the start of the technology and the market and the economy's building, but eventually we need to take some of those risks out, otherwise we're not going to get mainstream people coming into the space. And the last thing is, it's not going to get large numbers of people and users involved if it's not safe. We have to constantly look at how can we make this safer so that when people participate in the DeFi space, they can trust that it's going to work for them as it's intended. And so what I've come up with is a new kind of structure for looking at how we can improve adoption and get more people involved in this space. And I call these the 3S rules. I'll take through these 3 S's so you can get a little bit of a flavor for the things that we might want to focus on when we're looking at scaling DeFi to mass adoption. The first S in the 3S rules is make it safe, safety. You know, this is all about reducing risk for investors, reducing volatility for new entrants, and making apps safer to interact with. And so I've got some examples here on the right-hand side of things that could help make this space safer for users. If we look at the top, Barnbridge is a new protocol that is looking to take the volatility risk out of investing in digital assets. What does that mean? Well, it means that if you're an investor looking at this, the price is springing wildly up and down, that's a hard thing to put a lot of money into because you might lose a lot of money. And you also might make a lot of money, but some people are conservative and they want to kind of manage that risk. And so what Barnbridge is building is a way to reduce volatility and let people bite as much of the risk curve off as they're comfortable with, and as much as their sophistication would allow them to as an investor. And so this will allow lots more capital to come into the DeFi space, because more conservative organizations, maybe traditional finance organizations, can start to get a little bite of the upside that's in the crypto and DeFi space without taking the whole risk curve. So Barnbridge is a way to reduce volatility risk, those economic risks we talked about earlier. The next one down is Bridge Neutral. So Bridge Neutral is building insurance products in DeFi. So what is insurance about? It's all about reducing risk. We talked about reducing volatility risk, and now we're talking about reducing other kinds of risk through insurance. So that could be insuring for contracts. It could be putting insurance products built into DeFi that are open and more fair to everybody to use. So looking at how we can build types of insurance into the DeFi products to help reduce risk for new investors is a really important step. And Bridge Mutual is doing some cool things in that space. And the last thing you'll see our famous donut here. How can we make it safer to interact with? If you look at how people look at security, we'll go into security in the next slides. One thing that's often missed is that people focus on is the code doing what it says it should do? Well, that's a really important thing, but that's not necessarily the same as safety. So something could execute code really well and do what the audit says it was going to do. That doesn't mean that we've put protections in place to allow those applications to be safe to interact with. Some of the things that you might start to look at as options for improving safety are things like smarter wallets that have permissions about how much money can go in and out at any one time, or which contracts are allowed to interact with other contracts. How can we ensure that there's some kind of vetting process in the way that one protocol interacts with another protocol? And so the Donuts protocol allows us to create these complex and arbitrary sets of permissions to build more safety into the applications on top of the security layer. So look into how can you make your apps safer to interact with. Sometimes that's just in the UI, by making it easier for people to understand what they're doing. And then some of it's deeper in the technology. How can we build protections in the way that these composabilities work, so that we can make the application surface or the threat surface smaller as we get more and more sophisticated and larger investments into that space. The next S in this is make it simple. So if we can make it simple, then more people will use it. And at the moment, DeFi is a very complicated space for the average person. And so it's important to keep improving education and to allow people to get access to simple ways of explaining how this stuff works. It's important to think about the language that we use in our products. You know, the terms that we use, some of them are complex financial terms that not everyone will understand, and some of them are totally new terms that we need to come up with better ways to help explain those things. And there's lots of good educators out there that are building some really great material in this space, but we need to keep doing this education so that people understand both the benefits of DeFi, like all of those cool things we talked about, making it accessible and lower cost and all those sorts of things, but also how it functions. And you get some pretty complex things happening, which is really cool, but we need to be able to condense those into understandable things that people can use in their everyday life. And the last bit is usability. So really think about UX, and we've seen kind of a growth in people's focus on this space, but definitely still needs some more work. And UX is a really important feature of safety as well. So usability is part of the thing that will make it simple. How can we get into everybody's hands in a really simple way that they can use in their everyday life? And the last thing is secure. You might say this should be first, but this is kind of the obvious thing, which is why I talked about it last. But it's important to think about this as well. If you're working on a project, make sure you get your contracts audited. If you can, get it audited by more than one independent firm. If you're investing in the DeFi space, check to see that the protocols have been audited, and make sure that people who are involved with that process are respected in the industry. DeFi is all about trust minimization, of course, and blockchains are about trust minimization, but it is early days, and so you can look out for some of these things to help you make better decisions. I think the other thing is teams, and we talked about the technology being trust minimization, but there are a lot of anonymous teams out there that kind of put things out and pull rugs. And maybe in the early days, we need to look a little bit harder at the people behind these projects. And if you're prepared to put your reputation on the line behind a project, then that's something that's important to think about in the context of making the decision to invest in something or participate in something. It's another layer that shows that people are committed to doing things well and to taking the time to do them properly. And the last thing is underlying networks can play a big role in making things safe too. So if you look at some of the cool stuff that Cardano's doing about formal verification, that's a really interesting development in the DeFi space, because if you can use this form of verification in the way that you build your software, then you know that it's going to do what it says on the tin. And this can help to reduce the errors that might appear in contracts or potential hacks or those kinds of things. So formal verification is one really cool thing, and that Cardano's been making a lot of, doing a lot of research on and planning to implement in the way that they bring out smart contracts. The other one I mentioned earlier is what we've been doing with Plug, about building these complex permissions in place. So that you can be very particular about how different applications interact with each other, how users interact with those applications, at what level are they allowed to interact with you. So if you can build those kinds of things into the networks that the products are built on top with, then you can build a little bit more inherent security as well. So to summarize, DeFi is a powerful tool to help finance catch up to the age of the internet. We've got all these awesome services and products that we can use on the internet, but the finance world is kind of largely stuck back in the 50s and 60s in terms of the way their architectures and underlying systems come together. DeFi gives us the opportunity to upgrade finance to the internet age and start to provide some of those benefits that the internet offers in terms of openness and democratization, making things fair for everyone out there. And so I'd like to say thanks for having me on. Hopefully you were able to learn something today, and we can all take something from here in terms of how we build our products or how we interact with the products, to remember the 3 S's: check and work on safety, check and work on security, and lastly, check and work on making it simple. Thank you very much. Cheers and bye.